So you've booked a guest for your show, and now you're wondering, how do I actually introduce them? Well, stick around. Hey, I'm Coach Molle from the Visibility Hacking Studios, and today we're talking about podcasts, one of my favorite things to talk about. Specifically, we're talking about introducing your guests. And if you've been around in the visibility hacking world since the beginning, you have seen the evolution in our content, and you've seen the way that we used to introduce our guests, and you've seen the way that we introduce them now. Well, let me tell you a little bit of some backstory. I used to think that just being excited to have guests on my show, sharing that excitement, was enough to establish that guest's authority within my audience, and therefore establish my authority based on leveraging the authority of my guest. But the reality is, my friends, that if you're not framing the experience, if you're not framing the authority of your guest, your audience isn't going to know who they are, let alone why they should listen, let alone why you're such a big shot for having this big shot on your show. So we're going to change that around today. When an introduction is written properly, it can be the ultimate authority building strategy. So this is something we have to talk about. In this video, we're going to tell you why you sometimes just have to ask. And we'll talk about the visibility hacking hack that makes your guests say, wow. And at the end of the video, I'll show you the very simple introduction flow that we use. Sometimes when you're introducing your guests, you just have to ask them. So either ask your guest or the booking agent that you've been working with for an introduction, and whether or not that guest has a pre-written introduction or even a pre-recorded introduction that they prefer to use. Or maybe they don't care at all and they're looking forward to being introduced by you. Fantastic. There are certain guests that I have had on my show and I've had at conferences that I've organized who were adamant about being in charge of their introduction. And that makes total sense, because the power of an introduction is that you get to frame the experience, frame your authority for the audience. Now, this can be done in a variety of different ways, but when I told you about how I didn't really introduce my guests at all, well, I got called out on that by one of my guests. And unfortunately, that led to a deterioration of our relationship because she wasn't really excited about my lack of framing ability. So I went deep and thought about it for a while and studied how other people were doing it and looked at different ways and strategies and techniques that people were using so that I could figure out how to really harness and leverage the power of that introduction. Because as I say, a well-written introduction establishes authority not just for the person being introduced, but also to the host of that platform. So if you have these awesome guests on your podcast or your live show, you get to leverage that authority and that power all through a well-written introduction. So why don't you start by writing your own introduction and post it down in the comments below, because I would love to hear what amazing things that you guys have in your introductions to help really establish that authority and frame the experience for your listeners. Another thing I want you to think about when it comes to having guests on your show is not just the introduction at the beginning. A frame, just like a frame on a beautiful piece of artwork, wraps around the entire piece. It doesn't just live on one side of the frame, right? And that should be the same with how you are thinking about establishing that authority for your guests. So we want to introduce them with a traditional opener and introduction at the beginning. We know how that works. We want to set the stage, establish the authority, introduce them, make sure that they are both relatable and authoritative. But I also want you to think about what happens at the end of your episode. Continuing to have that established authority play throughout until the very, very end of that episode is going to set you apart from everyone else who's bringing guests on their show. So what I want you to think about is how you are planning your outros. Are you giving your guests an opportunity to get your audience members into their world, as I like to call it? Are there calls to action that invite your audience members to check out their social profiles, to check out the website or maybe even the opt-in of your guest? Are they able to participate with the knowledge that they've just gained from learning from that expert? Having those opportunities built into your show, making sure that we have a format that we follow on all of our shows, and we share this with all of our clients. And there are specific parts of those formats that are going to be the same for every single show because we make sure our visibility hackers have these parts of their format set in stone, recurring. It is like muscle memory when you're building these outros and you know to build in those calls to action. How do you get into your world? Hey, guests, tell me about how we get into your world. Do you have tips and tricks? Things like that. When you're planning this into your episode, that means before you hit record, when you're having that pre-show conversation with your guest, that's when you can have the conversation of, all right, do you have specific freebies or lead magnets or opt-in or tools that you can offer to the audience that we can make sure that we're throwing to? That way, you are really going to set yourself apart from just anyone who's playing podcast rather than really being in the game of business. So if you commit to doing that very, very simple change to your podcast or your live show, then give this video a thumbs up and why not subscribe while you're at it? And that way, we know to tell the algorithm to serve up more of our visibility hacking content to you. Let's talk about flow and process. I briefly alluded to our little cheat sheet that we give all of our visibility hacking customers, but I'm not going to give it to you because you have to be one of our customers. But what I will do is I will share a little bit of that flow so that you can get into the habit of doing even the simple things on that checklist. So what I want you to think about is the flow of your recording. So we usually should all start out with a little conversation before we actually start recording. This can be done in a discovery call or just at the beginning of your allotted recording time. This is where we want to uncover those things like, do you have lead magnets we can share? Do you want me to steer the conversation in a certain way? Where can we go with this interview? Clearly, you've done your research and you know where you are in alignment with this person and their movement and their message. So we don't need to talk about that. We have other videos for those. Check them out around the channel. But what I want you to focus on is that flow. So going from that pre-conversation into your episode, and then what do you do once you're done recording the outro to your episode? Well, what I like to do is actually record intros for my guests after I'm done the interview entirely. After the entire call is finished, I take a couple minutes to read through the notes that I went over, and then I jump on camera and record the introduction, and we edit that by slotting it into the episode, so it seems really seamless, but you also don't need to embarrass yourself by introducing your guest in front of them, because I know that for me was a roadblock when I was getting started, so I know that we have built a process that allows you to do it in a way that feels less nervous and has less eyeballs on you, but still has that same authority building effect. So you can record your intros when your guest is there on camera with you, or you can record them separately, depending on your level of comfort and what works best for your process and flow. Now, if you want more tips and tricks about building your podcast, building that established authority, or what we call your connection machine, regardless of what industry or niche you're in or what season of your business you're in, I invite you to join us over at visibilityhacking.com. And there's a link on that page that says Become a Visibility Hacker. This will allow you to join our private Facebook group where we go live on a regular basis. We have great opportunities for you to engage with our coaches, and we can help you build and design a custom solution for your people, your movement, your business, your students, whatever it is that you do. We can help you with that. So head over to visibilityhacking.com. I will see you in our next one. Until then, remember, I love you. Be excellent to each other. And just go live. Your people are waiting for you.